Hey guys, so this stream's to do a couple of things, right? I have had trouble over the last maybe year, 18 months connecting YouTube to TradingView and vice versa. I think we've just resolved that with the TradingView team. So guys, I really thank you for that. Um, if obviously not, I'll let you know as well, obviously in the help section. But in the grand scheme of things, right, what I wanted to do was just talk about why it's not as easy as kind of app only here right now. I think obviously for a lot of people they see that when you're saying nothing's changed and the price goes up, they assume that this is the wrong kind of call. This is oh well, this is wrong, that's wrong. Oh, actually it's only going up. I just want to highlight and emphasize why there's an awful lot more kind of bumpy roads ahead in terms of any move up, right? And what I wanted to also do was just to highlight that if we do only go up from here, where we actually cap to, because from a risk reward ratio, it kind of can also make the trade very unattractive, especially if you've got a longer term mindset with a buy and hold. And I think for me, looking for the confirmation, trading this professionally is completely different than jumping in leverage long and kind of hoping for the best, right? So to start with, right, I gotta go back, not just in time in terms of Bitcoin, but kind of in general, right? So what I want to talk about first of all is back, a couple of months, and I know one of my forex streams, I talked about this back in January. I think it was the 3rd or 5th of January this year. So we kind of 11 months down the line, and I think the obvious plays, right, is seeing some of these instruments, the forex instruments, commodities, for example. Obviously, with what DXY is doing, Bitcoin's starting to become a lot more institutionalized in the grand scheme of things, right? That's kind of obvious, that's apparent, but it goes back, obviously, a fair amount of time in terms of the transition. And, we're still through that process, as we speak right now, right? So what I wanted to do is just share a couple of these little things, right, that I talked about in terms of, why we would come down into kind of liquidity in terms of Aussie dollar and so on, how this correlates back to what I've been seeing with other things like DXY, right? So I'm just going to cover a couple of things on this, right? And it'll make a little bit more sense in terms of why Bitcoin, how you can use that for crypto, et cetera, whether it's, SPX, whether it's gold or just anything really, right? So in the grand scheme of things, right, I've talked about this particular move, right? And this is a Bitcoin move I discussed with the students back in September, right? Now, as you can see, there's a couple of key levels, right, that I've highlighted in and around here, right? So I've talked about this being ready for a particular stream, right? This is the same video. I talked about why we would actually go potentially down into this area of liquidity before going up sideways and kind of up again, right? Now, the one thing that kind of is very difficult to explain when people don't want to listen, right? As the price didn't tap the lower form of liquidity, and we've come straight up here, sideways, up to the next level, sideways, right? It's almost got a calling. There's this magnetic kind of pull towards these lower bands of liquidity, right? So I'm just going to show this on the Bitcoin chart, right, in terms of the lessons levels, right? So what I would have liked to have seen, right, is as we literally come, I think it was around this area. Let me just double check on the musing. So we tagged the bottom of this into liquidity, right? And then I think we kind of go back up from there, right? So we tag the bottom into liquidity and then we go up from there, right? So the issue for me here, right, is we haven't kind of swept enough in and around this zone, right? We've kind of tagged it a couple of times, right? And we kind of had this move on up, right? We kind of come back down. Or at this particular point, I would have loved to have seen this come in, right? Because I think that coming in at this point would have given us real momentum, true momentum, right? I think instead of having that, we actually, we failed to come down, right? Which is obviously back to what I was saying here, right? I'd loved this to have come in up sideways, right? Now, the problem for me, and this is why I said we kind of capped at a couple of these key levels, right? We've got some master pattern levels up high We got areas of interest, right? So this was the first area of interest, right? This was the first area of liquidity. So if I come back in smaller time frame, right, and I show, kind of what happened, right? So we started coming back down from the first zone, right? And this would have been, this would have been ideal, right? Another little run on this, and I think we would have had sustainable momentum to the upside, right? We didn't get it. We literally went up. We kind of hit the zone, come away from the zone, hit the zone, come back down, right? This particular point, we start kind of going slightly higher in the zone. We had the first fake out, right? We then go sideways. At this particular point, we had the kind of fake ETF news. And I'll come on to this in a second because I've actually found the site that I was trying to explain in the last couple of streams, right? So we literally then fire up through straight into the first level of liquidity, right? And although this wasn't sideways, right, it was kind of the change of character, right? Then we had obviously the hype and the kind of the false accusation. It was, is it in, is it not? Has it been removed, right? So I think for me, a lot of the people that kind of were starting to look in, to buy at this particular point, it was that really that kind of ramped it up to this level, right? Now, this was the first area of interest. Now, I talked about this, as I go back, like I said, this is on, September the 19th, right? Why these levels for me, why are they kind of key and critical in terms of grabbing some liquidity, using this to actually fuel where we need to go and why, right? Is I think as we kind of rallied on up, and like I said, this being unsustainable, we've come on up and we've gone kind of sideways, right? Now, a lot of your influencers, these guys are going to turn around and say things like, oh, this is a bull flag and, kind of off to the moon we go. The reality is it's kind of run out of steam, right? Now, running out of steam on hopium from that first BlackRock kind of ETF, I just want to touch on, which I've already done in my post, right? So this particular post here, I've done a couple of posts in terms of this ETF and what it kind of, means and what it represents, right? But I'm going to touch on as well BlackRock's own site, right? So you come blackrock.com/US/individual/education, come into this ETF, right? And you'll see this. And just, guys, seriously, come and have a look at this, right? I'm not sure with TradingView whether or not I can obviously copy the link. I know they're quite funny with things like this, so I'm not going to bother trying for the sake of. But in essence, here's the link, right? So if you come into this, what you'll see is BlackRock themselves, right, are talking about everything from what an ETF is, why they're popular, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Now, one of the things that really struck me is since the first launch, 1993, the industry has grown, right, with more than $3 trillion invested in ETFs, right? Somewhere on one of these pages, I saw that there was something like 1,400 ETFs across the globe, right? And this is covering, what were the actual asset classes? This was covering everything from stocks, bonds, sector and industry, commodities, style ETFs, alternative, ETF, foreign markets, actively managed ETFs, right? So, it's not just a one thing, one play. Oh, this is crypto, and there we go. It's understanding what's actually driving this ETF, right? And what an ETF does in terms of the market, right? So the first couple of things that struck me is just $3 trillion, right, invested in ETFs, over 1,400 ETFs since 1993, right? What kind of impact would something like this have, even with all of the $3 trillion going in across all of the variations of ETF categories, right? Which means the numbers that you read about online and kind of things, the shit that these influencers come up with, we're not going to see $3 trillion enter a Bitcoin ETF, especially not in one go, right? So understanding what a kind of a subpar number would give into an ETF, right, is the first, the first real clue in terms of why this isn't sustainable at this kind of current level, right? The second thing is, in one of these posts, let me come back to my profile, right? In one of these posts, I talked about, I think it was this one, right, in terms of the correlation in the market. I talked about, an ETF being approved back in 2021. I'm not sure if, yeah, it was this one, 2021. October the 30th, 2021, right? We had, this ProShares to launch the first US Bitcoin linked ETF. Right? Look what we've done since, right? Now, this isn't there's more opportunity to get into ETFs and the big boys have put money into the ETFs and look how much we've gone up. Right? We dropped down from this particular point to 15K, right? What do you think's happening in this region? Right? This region is clearly an accumulation range, right? But as I've talked about in a couple of my posts and a couple of my streams recently, right? The one major thing for me is the transition period, right? So we've already established that $3 trillion is not coming straight into ETFs. And we've already established that even if $3 trillion comes straight into the Bitcoin ETF, that you have potential for the price to drop rather than rise on the actual outcome of that ETF, right? So keep these two things in mind, right? Now, the next thing is, in this last post, I talked about, a lot of these retail traders and a lot of the kind of the bullish only calls, they got memories like a fish, right? Ultimately, they say, oh, we're bull market's back and we're off to the moon and this, that, and the other. We're still roughly 50% at 35K, right? That's roughly half of the 69,000 top, right? It's near enough, right? So the bullish intent is again kind of not as bullish as it might seem at first glance, right? It's definitely not as bullish as social media would suggest. Right? Now, going back even further in time, right? This is why I wanted to do this stream and kind of test the YouTube kind of part of this and the connection and so on. Was really thought this was important to cover in a bit more detail, right? So, look, from back when, right? This was kind of after I was able to publicly promote some of the trades and the investments and so on. As a money manager, I was limited to what I was allowed and what I could post and so on, right? So calling this move long, right, was clear for me in terms of what we were seeing, right? What I was, listening to in terms of LPs and family offices and so on. All of these meetings and all of these events that I was attending, seeing what was actually happening almost like behind the scenes, right? Kind of under the radar, right? So when we had this move up and it kind of confirmed, as a trader on one side, as a kind of tech investor on the other, you almost have two different hats that for the first time really for me, they kind of collided, right? They come together in a big way. What I started to look at, right, was this particular post, and I've talked about this on again the last couple of my streams, right? This particular post, this Bitcoin reaccumulation, this was the kind of, oh my god, I cannot believe what I'm seeing, right? This is the big boys really coming to the market, and you can witness this firsthand, right? This was kind of way above my level in terms of the kinds of involvement that we were seeing from a fund management perspective, right? This is the bigger players coming in. This was the kind of the baseline of Bitcoin actually creating a solid foundation, right? As we rallied on up, right, I called obviously the move down back to the 28K. Right? This was a clear 3-4. Now, this is why, for me, it was obvious, right? The Elliott wave count, the kind of seeing from a Wyckoff perspective what you'd expect with the kind of the three waves in terms of the buyer's climax, the UT, and followed by the UTAD. Clear as day, we got, exactly as we kind of predicted, right? This was exactly what I wanted to see. This was, what the whole market was kind of saying right now. And just kind of spelling it out, right? You had influencers calling for 100K. You had, everybody kind of jumping on the bandwagon. This is definitely reaccumulation, and we dropped, right? Now, for me, because of this level of institutional kind of involvement and movement, there's one clear indicator right, that you really need to pay some attention to. And that's the COT data, right? The COT data is a big enough sample size to give hints and clues as to what the bigger players are doing in the market, right? Now, this for me is where it becomes really fascinating, right? Because although in this particular post I've blended kind of the old with the new and the kind of the current with the previous kind of moves and swings, I really wanted to highlight this in terms of why I'm comfortable and confident in terms of the nothing's changed kind of scenario, right? Is that as we rallied on up over the last couple of weeks, right? We've had the selling, the shorts increase, right? Now, as clear as day, what that would suggest is prices rallying up, but the shorts increasing. If crypto Twitter and other social media and influencers and everybody, every man and their dog is currently calling this for 100K, 135K by 2 years ago. The reality is, right, we've got to a stage where the big boys are selling to the retail and the retail are not even able to see. Well, they don't want to see it, right? They probably are able to see it, right? They don't want to see it. They think that a BlackRock type ETF being approved is going to make every single retail trader rich, not knowing how the market actually works, right? I'm trying to give you guys, the heads up. I'm trying to give you guys kind of not only the heads up, but the lesson in terms of how you can see this for yourself. Right? I've talked about this, way, way, way in advance, right? I've talked about this going, back in terms of these moves, why these moves, right? What these moves are going to play out like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Now, fast forward a little bit, right? I've talked about this particular move on DXY, right? And this move for me, it started doing this quite nice, right? And we got it coming back down. And then all of a sudden we had a kind of a shock, and I'll show you this, right? We had this kind of shock play in this particular move, right? Let's come back to a daily time frame. So going back to when I was talking about this, right? We were kind of on the way up for this move, right? So we had the move up, we had the move down, right? We get so far, and then we had this kind of sweep of liquidity back to the upside, right? Now, obviously, at this particular point, it couldn't have been better timed in terms of the situation, right? To create almost a divergence between DXY, so the dollar, and Bitcoin, right? So what we've had now, we've had almost a completion, right? Near enough. It's getting there, right? We're a little bit away, right? And I talked about this, this is going back the start of October, right? So a month ago, right? We got pretty much, what I was expecting. We had obviously another little rally a bit higher than this particular point, right? But this is, this is the benefit of understanding the big picture, right? Knowing that the market needs to come back for the pullback, right, is something now that we're seeing. We've had divergence on Bitcoin, right? And this dollar against the Bitcoin, majority of people trade Bitcoin with the dollar rather than euro or pound or yen, et cetera, right? So ultimately, we've kind of dropped down to where we've expected, right? We've had this kind of 3-drive move down, right? We're in this position where Bitcoin's kind of struggled to create momentum as the dollar has fallen, right? So instead, what we've actually gone and done is we've created this kind of ascending move, right? And this isn't a bull flag, right? This is an ascending move that basically means that it's kind of run out of steam, right? It's kind of run out the puff, right? Now, at this particular point, right, I've talked about this, be able to zoom in enough on this, right, that I was basically saying 65K, and then we're going to see 40K again very quick, right? Now, the beauty of this, right, is the fact that it played out the way that I was anticipating, right? We got the 65K, we run just a little bit above, right, grabbed the liquidity for all new buyers and dropped down to 40K, right, which was this particular point here, right, before going sideways to drop again, right? I've talked about this, right? Now, what I'm seeing in this particular point is no different to what I'm seeing this, but in the inverse in terms of up instead of down and down instead of up, right? So in the grand scheme of things, where we are right now is we've gone up with kind of hopium, right? We've gone up with no real liquidity from the lower levels. We've gone up on depleting volume, which again I've talked about in a number of my streams, right? I've talked about it in loads of my posts, right? Let me talk about this here, right? We're already overbought on a monthly stochastic, right? We're already in terms, I think this is the weekly, or the next one is the weekly, right? We're already in a similar position on a weekly, right? And therefore, we've kind of run out of steam, right? We got angles, right? And I've been generous by giving this a 28-degree angle, right? This was going from the previous top, right? If you come to this top instead, it's less than 28 degrees compared to a 48-degree top, right? From the low, swing high, right? Before we had the big pullback, right? So I've been generous in terms of saying 28 degrees. How bullish does that look, right? How bullish, what kind of intent does that really scream, right? We've seen COT data, right, up here, right? We've seen the lack of volume pushing this up, driving this up. We've covered the BlackRock ETF in terms of 1,400 ETFs, 1993, $3 trillion across 1,400 ETFs. Right? This is not me making shit up, right? This is me kind of being genuine with you guys, trying to kind of show you the wood through the trees, really, right? In the grand scheme of things, right? What we've done really is we've pumped on retail hopium, right? And this is the perfect opportunity for the large institutional players, right? I've even covered this back in, I don't even know when this was. I covered this back in April, May, right? When I actually had the book published, right? I've covered this in chapter 20 in terms of the current situation, right? For the, where were we to? For the current accumulation, right? On this post, right? So literally, I've talked about these moves, right? I've talked about the ETF. I've talked about the value of the ETF covering the market cap, depleting volume as we've gone up with kind of crap trend angles and so on, right? As we rallied up, like I said, to this, 65K, we go into 69 based on, again, hopium, right? You had your people like your plan Bs and so on talking about 135K, right? We haven't seen 135Ks. We're 2 years down the line, right? And we're still down low. We're still 50% roughly of the all-time high, right? What I can see from a mile away with all of this, right? This isn't just, hey, look, I was right here, I was right there, I'm right again. I'm definitely right on the next move. I know that for a fact, right? I'm not questioning, doubting that, regardless of how cocky or arrogant that sounds, right? I'm more than confident in where we are right now, right? As we saw these moves, right? The reality is for me with a lot of this is when something happens exactly as you expect, time and time again, as I've just covered in all these different posts, right? This isn't I guess this it'll drop down to 28. I knew it was coming to 28, right? This move back up, I knew we would see a move down, followed by a move up. I knew we would only go just above 65K. I knew we'd see 40K again very quick. I knew we would see a trend line break as we come in to the start of this particular move, right? This isn't guesswork. This isn't luck, right? This is understanding what the larger institutional players are looking to do to retail, right? When you couple all of this together, right, the beauty of where we are right now is we've actually got what I would class as smart money dumb trades, right? Now, in the grand scheme of things, if you're only looking for leverage long moves and you're only looking to go long and long and long until you go bust, right? Crack on. If you want to understand what Bitcoin's really doing, kind of why it's doing, when it's doing, right? You have to come in and understand that these things, these types of move happen for a reason, right? And it's smacking you in the face, right? In terms of where we are right now, we've got massive levels of liquidity in and underneath these levels here, right? That's the first real play, right? The real value kind of card there, right? So at the moment, we've got retail pushing the price up. We've gone relatively sideways with a 28-degree, generous 28-degree angle, depleting volume. the BlackRock story, the ETF or the lack of ETF at the moment, right? Where do you think we're really likely to go, grand scheme of things? We got divergence on DXY, right? These things are all setting itself up for a much, much bigger move, right? You can see these things, and I've had comments like this, right? Really enjoyed the last subscriber stream, right? It was amazing how you called this so exact within 3 hours before the move, right? The reality is, guys, Bitcoin is doing what Forex has done, right? And what Forex has done for years and years and years. Right? These moves are so respectable, right? These types of moves, so respectable in the grand scheme of things, right? We've talked about these moves, why are we going? Now, this was, back, back the start of the year, right? I've covered this. You can go back through my posts, my streams, right? You see, this was actually drawn, right, way back when, right? I can't even remember how far back. That's probably nearly enough a year, right? These types of moves are playing out exactly as you'd expect them to play out. Why? Because they're respectful. They're respectful based on DXY and DXY's correlation to the market, right? This isn't just a guess. This is knowing why these markets do what the markets do in a bigger picture, right? So back in terms of Bitcoin, right? What I'm seeing right now and what I've seen overall, right, is we've come down. We've got all this depleting volume, overbought, weekly, monthly, 28-degree angles, and so on, so on. Right? All we are, I did actually have, I don't know where it's gone, I did actually have chapter 20 of the book kind of pulled up, but it's clearly gone, so I won't bother looking for that at the moment. But in the grand scheme of things, guys, right, all I've basically said, and I've said this and I'm going to kind of stick to this, right, is every single move and every single call that I've called so far, right, the biggest concern that I have is that this is obviously a large scale A followed by a B type move, right, which means we come back for the C, right? It doesn't have to be deep, it just needs to be ugly, right? If we are actually bullish right now, right, and again, I've covered this time and time again, you'd have to consider one of these moves, probably a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right, which would put us in a 5 equals a 1, right, larger scale 1. You'd have to come back down for a 2, right, which means you'd have a nested 1, 2 move, right, 3, 4, 5. If this is what we're seeing as a 1, 2, 3, right, we're going to come back down for a 4 anyway, right, which means 5 as a larger scale move is capped roughly in the 40k region, right, 40k somewhere, right, 42, 43, 45k, probably with a bit of hopium, right? At that particular point, this is what we deem as bullish, right? All the way to 42k. Isn't that not a concern for anybody, even if you are bullish, right? So the reality is, coming up to come down is actually healthy for the market, right? Where we are right now is no different. Let me get rid of all of these. Let's leave those on a second, right? Coming back there for that, the 42k that I've just said, in terms of an extension, is back to what I said right at the start of the stream, right? So these things, like I said, they're not coincidence, right? They're not kind of by accident. These things are happening because the market is kind of saying, well, this is what I need to do before I do my next move. Right? So the reality is, I genuinely hope for anybody that is bullish that we actually get a nice pullback down into liquidity, allowing us to really travel up. Because at the moment, if this goes up directly to 42, I don't see 100k for another 2 years plus. And that's a concern, right? That's a concern for anybody who is bullish Bitcoin right now. So actually, the more preferred, the more beneficial move for everybody who's interested is we go up to come down, we grab more liquidity, to drive the price higher, right? And that's what I feel we are. That's why I feel this is still an AB move rather than a 0-1 move that we probably would have to justify 0-1 around here, back down to 1-2 nested, giving us 3-4-5. That would actually cap it, like I said, 40k probably at a max in terms of a move before we come down anyway, right? So for me, this isn't the fact that nothing's changed, because nothing has changed in terms of the analysis that I put out 18 months ago, right? I still feel that this isn't bullish enough of a change of character for this to rally on up to 100k, right? And therefore, that's where I think we are. Right? I'm just going to check to see any questions on this before I finish. If not, enjoy the rest of the weekend. I hope this worked on YouTube as well, and I'll let you guys know if there was any issue. Yeah, cheers, guys. Yeah, I failed at making a lot of money out of Bitcoin since 2011, so I'm genuinely happy with that. You know, I'm guessing that you're still watching these videos for some real value rather than watching your friend Moon Carl maybe. But anyway, other than that, thanks again, guys. Enjoy the weekend, and I'll see you on the next stream.